Chapter 6, Ground Zero. Something keeps popping up every so often in these scriptures pertaining to God's relationship with Israel, but I've been purposely avoiding the subject. Did you catch it? The land. What's up with that? Yahweh created the entire universe. What does he need with land, especially a tiny strip of semi-desert on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean with few known natural resources, too rocky to farm without intense labor, perennially short of water, and surrounded by people who hate him? Why on earth does God love this land? Canada, I could believe, not Canaan. On the other hand, why does he love us? On our own, we're pretty worthless too, more a part of the problem than we are of the solution. A few years on this insignificant rock and we go the way of the dodo. Why does God bother with us? Amazingly, it's because we are the whole point. Beings formed in His image, made specifically to be companions for our Creator. Remember, we were once better than we are now, immortal and sinless. And one day we will be restored to this state, actually something even better. In the same way, there is evidence that the land of Israel was once much more than the barren, rocky, semi-wasteland that we see today, punctuated here and there by gardens wrested from the land by Herculean effort on the part of the Jews. At the time of the Exodus, Canaan was apparently lush, fertile, and well-watered. The spies Moses sent in came back with a cluster of grapes so big it had to be carried on a pole between two of them. The place was described by two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, as
an exceedingly good land. If Yahweh delights in us, then He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Numbers 14:7 and 8.
God had His eye on this land long before the Exodus, of course. When He told Abram to get out of your country, probably in the southern Euphrates River Valley, from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, He knew exactly where He wanted Abe to go. We pick up the story in Genesis 12.
So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. Then Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, To your descendants I will give this land. Genesis 12:5-7.
Note that God didn't say Abram himself would be given the land, but his descendants, of whom he had none at the time, would. All Abe actually ended up owning of it was a burial plot he bought from the Hittites.
And Yahweh said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, Lift up your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and to your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Genesis 13:14-17.
I find it touching that Yahweh wanted Abram to personally experience the whole thing. It's like a doting father on Christmas morning, not satisfied with seeing his boy opening his gift, but wanting to show him all the features, how it's built, what it does. It just screams, I love you. Later, he provided more specifics.
Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Genesis 15:18 through 20.
Unfortunately, we don't know the precise locations of all these tribes. Canaan lent its name to the whole region, but the tribe was strongest along the coastal plain. The Hittites' huge empire was centered far to the north in modern Turkey. Thus, it's probable that not all Hittite lands would be Abram's, but only their colonies in the Levant. The reference to the Euphrates places Abram's promised northeastern border in today's northern Syria, where the Hittites were particularly strong. The Euphrates' actual headwaters, however, are in east-central Turkey, the heart of the Hittite Empire. It's hard to say exactly where the Hittites were in Abram's day, or precisely what Yahweh meant, but we should note that the burial cave he bought from Ephron the Hittite was about 15 miles southwest of Hebron, midway between the Mediterranean and Dead Seas. The Rephaim were located in today's southern Syria, east of the Sea of Galilee, including the land known as the Golan Heights. The Jebusites' capital was Jebus, or Jerusalem. South of that is, west of the Dead Sea, were the Perizzites, and the Amorites occupied, at the time, the valley of Siddim, south of them. So at the very least, we can identify a territory far larger than modern-day Israel, one including all of Lebanon, a chunk of western Syria, but not Jordan. To the east of the Jordan River, south of the Rephaim, lived the Zuzites, Emites, and Horites. Since these nations were not on Abram's list, we can deduce that the river was meant to be the eastern border. The Kenizzites are a hard one to figure out. The Kenizzites, spelled with an I, were an Edomite tribe, apparently neighbors of the Horites to the west, that is, south of the Dead Sea. But at this point, there were no such people as Edomites, descendants of Abraham's son Esau. And there is no record of an earlier patriarch whose name suggests a connection with the Kenizzites. The Kenites were a Midianite tribe, thus possibly, give that one a speculation factor of 8, located south and east of the Gulf of Aqaba, the northwestern tip of present-day Saudi Arabia. The Cadmonites are a mystery. The name Kadmone simply means eastern. The Genesis 15 passage is the only time the name is used as a tribal entity. The river of Egypt is often assumed to be the Nile, but it's not. There was another river about 50 miles down the coast from Gaza, entering the Mediterranean at its southeast corner, known as the River or Brook of Egypt. Today it's called the Wadi El Arish. It's a dry wash for most of the year. Now, some commentators have protested that the word for river, or the Hebrew nahar, means a real flowing river, not a wadi. However, we must remember that in Abram's day, the climate in the region was quite different than it is today. The Brook of Egypt likely flowed all year round. Besides, God called the Euphrates, quote, great, and it is, but not overly so when compared to the mighty Nile. Abram had seen and crossed both rivers by this time. See Genesis 12. So it was clear that the great river was indeed the Euphrates, and the river of Egypt was something less than great. Today's Wadi El Arish. Another point, the Amalekites, who lived just south of the Brook of Egypt, were not included in the list of territories Abram was promised. That covenant, by the way, was serious stuff. Normally, if two parties were striking a bargain, they would each remove a sandal and exchange them. This was the rough equivalent to shaking hands on it. But this was a covenant of blood. Sacrificial animals were split in two, and both parties would walk between the pieces as if to say, if I do not keep my end of the bargain, may I be cut in two like this. But Yahweh put Abram out cold and went alone between the two halves of the sacrificial animals, making this a unilateral covenant. Abram had no conditions whatsoever placed upon him. Later, lest Abram, now called Abraham, should think this deal had an expiration date on it, Yahweh told him,
I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Genesis 17:8.
That, of course, reinforced God's promise to preserve the nation. They couldn't very well possess the land of Canaan if they were extinct. Interestingly, the quote, non-Jewish branches of the family began to settle outside the land of promise. Lot's descendants, related to Abraham but not in the line of promise, became the nations of Moab and Ammon, moving due east of the Dead Sea. That's today's Jordan. Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, far to the south, in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. And what about Esau, Abraham's grandson?
Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, and all his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. Genesis 36, 6-8.
Edom is located south and east of the Dead Sea, also in present-day Jordan, and outside of the Promised Land. It's tempting to explain away the tiny borders of present-day Israel by saying that the promise applied to all of Abraham's descendants, including Ishmael, the father of the Arabs, and the sons of Keturah, Abe's second wife. That theory won't hold water, however. The definition of his borders did not cease with Abraham, but was reiterated by Yahweh in successive generations, ruling out their application to anyone but the Jews. Not surprisingly, God gave instructions on the subject to Moses right after the Exodus, for he was supposed to lead his people into the Promised Land. The description, though, seems at first to be rather vague.
And I will set your bounds from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Exodus 23:31.
Today, Israel's southern tip touches a 100-mile-long extension of the Red Sea called the Gulf of Aqaba. This is the body of water referred to as the Red Sea in the story of Exodus. Underwater archaeologists have discovered Pharaoh's chariots strewn across the bottom like broken toys. But the reference to Kenites above might, give us a speculation factor of 8, indicate that God really did mean the Red Sea proper, including the entire eastern shore of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia's northwest corner today, the place where Mount Sinai is actually located. Arguing against this theory, though, is the fact that the Midianites who lived there in Abraham's day were not specifically included in the list of nations his family would displace. By the way, the liberals can't have it both ways. If, as they say, Moses merely parted the, quote, Reed Sea, a foot-deep marsh on the northern end of the Gulf of Suez, miraculously drowning Pharaoh's entire army in this insignificant puddle, then according to the formula above, the Israelites were only being promised the Sinai Peninsula west of today's Suez Canal. And if, as some would say, the river here meant the Nile and not the Euphrates, as it is blatantly stated in Deuteronomy 1:7 and elsewhere, then the Promised Land didn't come anywhere near Canaan, something that's specifically spelled out in scores of other places, but was comprised entirely of the very land in which they'd been slaves for the past 400 years, the land of Goshen in northeastern Egypt. The lesson? If you're willing to play fast and loose with the plain meaning of the Hebrew text, be prepared to do a constant juggling act with the rest of the Bible. The Red Sea is not the Reed Sea. The Sea of the Philistines is obviously the Mediterranean, for Philistia was located along its southwestern shoreline. Today's Gaza Strip, more or less. The river, based on numerous other passages, is clearly the Euphrates. A quick look at the map reveals that the Euphrates actually comes within 100 miles of the Mediterranean coast at about the 36th parallel, approximately the same latitude of Antioch.